felt like I was reading about someone who understands me. Not Huck Finn, not Tom Sawyer, but Holden Caulfield. And we'll put it on here at school, and I'm gonna play Holden.
You have Salinger's permission?
If you keep up with media in any way, I'm sure you've had the thought at some point, they're making that a movie? And I'm not blaming you, I mean, it's a very relatable cause. Most people probably don't even think that there is a project out there that Hollywood can't get its hands on. However, there is one movie that not even the biggest names in Hollywood have been able to adapt. A movie that truly feels impossible to create. For those that don't know, this is the story of the decades of Hollywood trying to make a Catcher in the Rye movie. I'm probably explaining something to you that you already know, but it's a cute way to open the video, so just pretend you don't know this, okay? The Catcher in the Rye is easily one of the most famous and best-selling books of all time. Written by J.D. Salinger and originally published in 1951, it is a very polarizing book. You either love it or you hate it. I remember reading it in high school and half the class loved it and the other half hated it. But with that said, its fans are still many. When BBC took a poll of its audience's favorite books, Catcher in the Rye came in 15, beating all of these classics. And if you were forced to read it in high school too, you might have noticed this was the only book that the teacher didn't wheel in a TV on an old tray to play a movie off of. In fact, while most of the other books on that list have been adapted into movies or TV, Catcher in the Rye sticks out in just how unadapted it is. To understand why this is, you have to understand the possibly insane person who wrote Catcher in the Rye, as well as the book's main character, Holden Caulfield. Remember when I said half the class who read it couldn't stand it? Well, more specifically, half the people who read the book can't stand Holden Caulfield. Holden is a very angry teenager, and since he's the narrator and the entire book's from his perspective, we get to know him pretty well. Your enjoyment of the book really comes down to how much you can relate or empathize with Holden. After getting kicked out of boarding school right before Christmas, Holden sneaks out and spends a weekend in New York City, where he complains about everything and starts fights with just about everyone he comes across. He complains a lot about the adult world and society and how fake and inauthentic everything is, how it brings out the worst in everybody, how it's just an awful rat race of everyone looking out for themselves, how cruel and oppressive and rigged the entire society is. Holden's an asshole for sure, but he's also not necessarily wrong. Anyone who's ever felt like the world is out to get them can relate at least a little bit to Holden's anger. And clearly a lot did. It sold 65 million copies, and there's a good chance you've read it too. Filmmakers saw a good chance for a movie and approached the author himself. J.D. Salinger. He's really not what you'd expect him to be. He's an incredibly private person, an East Asian philosophy enthusiast, World War II veteran, and even spent time in Germany helping hunt down Nazi war criminals. Just how reclusive was J.D. Salinger? Well, I have to keep using footage of the BoJack Horseman version of him because he never gave a video interview his entire life.
I'll tell you when it's too far. This is my art, god damn it. I'm J. Goddamn D. Goddamn Salinger, and I want rain.
Is that what he sounded like? Who knows? He's written other stuff here and there, but nothing took off like Catcher in the Rye. Salinger has said repeatedly that he never expected Catcher to get remotely as popular as it did. And after reading some of Salinger's other work, I can kinda see why. Like, don't get me wrong, Salinger's work isn't bad by any metric, but I certainly wouldn't be counting it among the other writers on that BBC Big Read list. And this newfound fame of his really caught him off guard. Catcher in the Rye was popular in the 50s, but the counterculture of the 60s made it a nationwide phenomenon, and all the attempts to ban it over the decades has just kept it popular and relevant. Hollywood has been itching ever since to make an adaptation. Now, J.D. Salinger owned sole film rights to Catcher in the Rye. If you can't convince him, you're not even getting past step 1 on making this movie. But J.D. Salinger was hesitant about this. For one thing, J.D. Salinger really didn't like the idea of cinema to begin with. Now, his biographers claim that J.D. Salinger secretly loved movies, but I'm not so sure I agree. I agree it wasn't always the case. When J.D. Salinger started off as a writer, he pitched a number of stories to big studios. A lot of his early work was written with the intent of selling it to Hollywood. So what happened that colored his view? Well, for one thing, Salinger's girlfriend ran off with then Hollywood's top guy, so that didn't help. That was problem one. But J.D. Salinger is a very introverted guy who really doesn't like working with others. So when he got his first big break by selling a story to Samuel Goldwyn, he wasn't happy to learn that filmmaking is full of other heads of departments, all of which have their own ideas on how to make a movie. They changed the title from Uncle Wiggily in Connecticut to My Foolish Heart. And that wasn't the only change they made to Salinger's story. J.D. Salinger was furious with how much they changed his work. He was really surprised to learn that an 8-page short story being turned into a feature-length movie would have to take some liberties. This might seem silly, but this is not a view unique to Salinger. It's a pretty common opinion among writers and authors that always hate seeing their work get changed for the big screen.
27 years in Hollywood, I think I have seen 3 of the things I have written done in a way that did not make me cringe.
I didn't care for the movie of The Queen of the Damned at all. I begged the studio not to make that movie. I told them that the readers really didn't want that movie.
Shelley Duvall as Wendy is really one of the most misogynistic characters ever put on film. She's basically just there to scream and be stupid, and that's not the woman that I wrote about.
I know I'm repeating myself here, but I think it's important to show you just how different authors and filmmakers think. When you're an author writing a book, you don't have to negotiate with anyone or make any sacrifices to your vision. You have full creative control to write whatever you want, and maybe you'll have an editor that will ask you to rephrase some things or change slight aspects of your story. But when you're a filmmaker on set, you have a team of people, all with their own expertise and own department, all with a different vision on how best to make something or a certain aspect of a movie. This is an opinion said best by Judith Weston, who realized that the best directors don't need to have an opinion on everything in order to be the best directors. That sometimes it's best to leave matters to experts in that department or field whom you trust to get your vision across. Putting it simply, filmmaking is a collaborative art. Writing a book is not. And that was going to be a problem for J.D. Salinger, whom, like most authors, is not used to having to concede any part of their creative control. Seeing My Foolish Heart forever dampened Salinger's desires to make cinema. He'd rather just write alone by himself and have final say over everything forever. Salinger is also an incredibly stubborn and crazy man himself. Just talk to his editors and publishers about all of Salinger's strange demands he wanted. He hated paperbacks, covers that depicted characters, he didn't want a biography of him or his picture anywhere in the books, no free books or deals with book clubs, the release of his book Franny and Zoe had to be advertised as little as possible. He even demanded that some of his stories could only be released 50 years after his death. Why do you even write things if you hate the idea of people reading them that bad? So, it's no wonder that J.D. Salinger hated the idea of a movie adaptation. But some of the pitches Salinger was getting did not help. Jerry Wald, and he's the type of person that now nobody knows his name anymore, but he was very prominent in Hollywood at the time. And he's one of the first prominent people to offer to make Catcher in the Rye. But he only did so at the end of a letter where he trashes Salinger's other works, so not off to a good start. But it wasn't just hacks offering Salinger money. Billy Wilder was gearing up to make a Catcher in the Rye movie, only for Salinger to show up in person to his office and tell him to fuck off. Steven Spielberg was turned down, Harvey Weinstein was turned down, Jack Nicholson was turned down, Elia Kazan was turned down. He didn't even return Jerry Lewis's calls. Even Michael Eisner tried to make a Disney movie of Catcher in the Rye using dogs. Yeah, this is real. It was going to be called Doofus. But this didn't really go far. J.D. Salinger wasn't just not interested in their money, he just didn't want his name to become any more well-known. J.D. Salinger is famous in a way for how much he hated fame. He never made public appearances, he had one book signing that didn't go well, He was scared of coming off smug and pretentious because his old army buddies told him he was smug and pretentious. He moved out to the middle of nowhere, New Hampshire, and didn't talk to reporters for 20 years. Also, J.D. Salinger was never a big fan of the Catcher in the Rye fanbase. And after just watching a 2-hour documentary where they pat themselves on the back for stalking him, I kinda get why.
One day I said to my wife, I've got to try it. I've got to go. And I kissed her goodbye. It drove 450 miles to the Vermont-New Hampshire border and tried to find him. I knew this was a hard thing because I found the neighborhood people protected him and they wouldn't exactly tell me where he lived. This long, winding gravel driveway where I thought he lived. Sure enough, probably in the mid-morning, 2 cars came down the driveway. One was his son, Matt Salinger, a teenager, and J.D. Salinger stopped his car, his BMW, got out, walked over to the driver's side. I said, "Are you J.D. Salinger?" Because I did not recognize him from the photographs. And he says, "Yes, what can I do for you?" And I said to him very dramatically, "I was hoping you could tell me." And he said, "Oh, come on, don't start that kind of thing. Are you under psychiatric care?"
Imagine camping out on someone's lawn and being shocked that they tell you to fuck off as they're just trying to get from their car to their house. See, I love Stephen King. I think he's the most creative writer alive. I would never even have the thought to just drive out to his house uninvited and ambush him as he's just trying to bring in groceries.
So it's 1979. I got an assignment from Newsweek magazine to photograph this author. He doesn't like to be photographed, but we do know he picks up his mail in Windsor, Vermont. So I waited. And then this Jeep pulls up, and he gets out, and he goes into the post office really quickly. And then as he came back out, I got it. I got Salinger.
He makes it sound like he just got a photo of Bigfoot and not just some poor old man trying his best to hide from assholes like him. This might be crazy, but maybe this dude moved out to the middle of nowhere and didn't talk to reporters for decades because he just wanted to be left alone. But no, according to these psychopaths, this was all part of Salinger's secret plan to become more famous. It sounds like I'm strawmanning, but this is really what they think.
He enjoys the game.
Reclusivity is a great public relations device, among other things.
By being out of the picture, he is in the picture. And I think that is probably an intentional paradox on his part.
He actually wanted morons to show up to his house unannounced. This would be the most roundabout way to try to get famous in human history. J.D. Salinger wants to be more famous, so instead of writing books or doing interviews or something, he's playing some 4D chess by doing the exact opposite of all that. Starting to see why Salinger didn't want any more Catcher fans? And his disappointment doesn't end there. In late 1980, Mark Chapman shot John Lennon and cited Catcher in the Rye as his influence and was even reading a copy of the book immediately after the murder.
J.D. Salinger, who has not been heard from in years, he's reclusive, wrote Catcher in the Rye, a book read by millions, admired by millions. I wonder what he must be thinking as he, if he is, watching this. Mark, why are you blaming a book?
I'm not blaming a book. I blame myself for crawling inside of the book, and I certainly want to say that J.D. Salinger and the Catcher in the Rye didn't cause me to kill John Lennon. In fact, I wrote to J.D. Salinger. I got his box number from someone.
Just a couple months later, a copy of Catcher in the Rye was found in John Hinckley Jr.'s hotel room, right after he tried to kill Ronald Reagan. This became a big news story, and outraged groups were quick to talk about how Catcher in the Rye is some devil book that turns good Christian men into killers.
And you just leave Catcher in the Rye next to him? Cops think they're cuckoo when they wake up.
And if you think the press wouldn't leave Salinger alone before, now he just couldn't escape them. I'm not trying to psychoanalyze him here, but I don't think it's hard to imagine why someone who already is a recluse to begin with is now trying even harder to shut down any adaptations if this is his experience with public life and his fan base. Some people, though, have their doubts that a Catcher in the Rye film would even work at all. Catcher's full of long monologues where it really does just feel like you're having a conversation with Holden Caulfield. and a lot of people seem to think that this would be impossible to replicate in a movie, as if no movies ever had a voiceover narrator or a main character that just talks to the audience before. This also leads into another point, though, that a lot of people go into an adaptation simply judging it by how closely it follows the source material. And I guess at first glance that makes sense, but doesn't judging things like this kind of miss a lot of good potential? Sometimes adaptations are different. Sometimes adaptations add something new in place of something that was missing. Obviously, there are examples of adaptations that fail in comparison to the original, but there are also examples of adaptations that are above and beyond their source material. If there ever was a Catcher in the Rye film, I don't think it would be impossible to make one that could be as personal with the audience as the book was with the reader. Although there is another question that has to be mentioned. If an author is this obsessed of keeping away adaptations, at some point should we not just let him be? J.D. Salinger said Holden Caulfield is somewhat based on him, and the more I research him, the more I see it. One of the only things Holden ever likes in Catcher was the Museum of Natural History, and his reasoning why is very simple. Nothing at a museum ever changes. All the artifacts and fossils will be sitting there looking exactly the same every time you visit. Nobody can mess with them, nothing can corrupt them, and for that reason, it's his favorite place. Holden's scared of change, he's scared of growing up, he's scared of a cruel adult world that sucks the blood out of everything. And it seems J.D. Salinger thinks the same, wanting to keep his book exactly the way it is, just like a fossil in a museum, away from any change or adaptation, away from all the greed and materialism that wrecks the beauty of life. I have no doubt that some great filmmaker could make an incredible Catcher film. But should they? I'm not sure.